everyone. Welcome to another live stream on HFI Podcast. And today I'm joined by Dr. Gregory Doudna. And today's discussion is based on his contribution, his article titled, Is Josephus' John the Baptist passage a chronologically dislocated story of the death of Hyrcanus II? The link to it will be provided in the description below and in the pinned comment after the live stream is over. So, Gregory, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start us off with what were the first clues that you saw in your research that eventually led you to the conclusion that the John in Josephus, John the Baptist, isn't quite the John the Baptist of the Gospels that everybody believes? What's going on there?
Well, it's an excellent question, and it was a circuitous route for me, and it's an interesting, unique journey on that. It started, I should back up and say, as you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they were discovered, there was a lot of early interest in Christian connections with the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were a lot of questions about that. So people were looking for Jesus and John the Baptist. Now, everybody knows that that is not correct in the direct sense, because all of the scrolls, none of the scrolls are believed to have been composed after the 1st century BCE. So that a lot of that early discussion is completely obsolete. But there was this continuing subcurrent of scholarship that saw connections between John the Baptist, the Essenes, and the scrolls. And nobody knew quite what to make of that, but it seemed like there was a lot of overlaps there, continuity, whatnot. The point being that my field training was Dead Sea Scrolls at the University of Copenhagen. That's where I worked on the scrolls. And I looked at this figure, the teacher of righteousness, which was so controversial, and there's 100 million theories. And I became convinced of an identity of the teacher of righteousness that was unprecedented, as far as I could tell, in the world of scholarship. And that was that I focused on the figure of Hyrcanus II. A number of scholars have considered Hyrcanus II to be the bad guy, the wicked priest, and so forth and so on. And I came to realize, not directly and not immediately, but through a lot of process of thinking, I began to see that Hyrcanus II matched and correlated with the teacher of righteousness figure in the Qumran text. Now, it never occurred to me that Hyrcanus II was this passage in Josephus about John the Baptist. That didn't even occur to me for years and years. And then it was an independent development that I was looking at the John the Baptist passage again. And I saw these parallels on how there was a lot of overlapping parallels with how Hyrcanus II was described. And I just looked at it more, and I looked into the issue of the matter of doublets, how ancient, I saw that basically Antiquities is a rewrite of the war with some added material in, and that this John the Baptist passage, some think it's been interpolated. I actually believe it is interpolated by Josephus or Josephus's team. However, when you say Josephus, I'm referring to whatever that process of production was to which his name has been attached. But the point being that this John the Baptist passage in Antiquities was inserted into pre-existing material from war from a source. And so it was, that's why it looks like an interpolation, because it actually was on the original editing composition stage, not at a later stage, which some argue that, but that's not what I'm arguing. And then I began to match it up, and it was like a shock of recognition, and I had to really work through all the details and so forth. But it was a shock of recognition that this was as shocking as it sounds at first. This was actually Josephus or his team, or however you want to view the process of production of composition, basically had a story about John in a source and attached it to the wrong Herod. And so it's like the phenomenon of doublets, which Josephus is filled with doublets. The biblical text are filled with doublets. The narrative historical text is filled with doublets. This is where you get different versions and different sources of stories, and the editors will just put them both in. And so you get a slightly different version of the same story told as if it's on the surface, as the text overtly reads, it's like two separate events that sound very similar, and actually they're actually two different versions of the same story. And this happens in Josephus. Josephus was collecting material, particularly like at the war. After the war, there were all these stories and legends, and I think, the captives were being debriefed. Josephus was part of that debriefing interrogation process after the collapse of the Jewish revolt. And all these stories were collected, and they're put in, and they weren't doing critical scholarship to try to decipher which story is which. They're just throwing them in, of doing some scholarship, but it's not completely accurate scholarship where it's clear in Josephus that there are many of these stories are doublets of each other. The difference between the John the Baptist story in Josephus and Hyrcanus II is simply it's a little longer of a gap in time. A lot of these doublets happen right next to each other or separated by only a small number of years. This is a little bit longer gap in time, but it's got parallels because it's already known. I mean, this is well discussed. It's not controversial in terms of the scholarly discussion that there's confusions between Hyrcanus I and Hyrcanus II, John Hyrcanus I and Hyrcanus II, in some of these documents. That
before you continue, there's a loud buzzing noise I'm getting from your microphone.
I apologize about that. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Just a second. I'll take. I'm not the most technically literate person here on computers.
That's all right.
I hear is the fan of my computer? I don't know what it is. I apologize about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what. Just be closer to the microphone.
Okay.
That should.
How about this?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Continue.
Okay. So, where were we on that? That's basically it's doublets. They've got the John the Baptist story is actually a story from a source of the death of Hyrcanus II that got attached to the wrong Herod by mistake, not by intention, but it was by mistake. That's very well paralleled by other similar mistakes. That's the basic argument.
What are the other similarities in there between Hyrcanus II and John the Baptist, Josephus as John the Baptist?
Yeah, and in terms of method, I took only the John the Baptist passage because the John the Baptist passage is the start. I mean, it's like the Gospels, I believe, are working from Josephus as a source, as for part of their John the Baptist material. But set that aside, the John the Baptist passage matches with Hyrcanus II in I'll just run down the ways. The parallels are so if you start with the most basic things, just about everything in the passage corresponds to Hyrcanus II. That has to be explained and elaborated in my paper. I go through that, but it's you start with, you have Hyrcanus II was an extremely reputable figure, underestimated actually, but he was deposed from being high priest. He was in exile in the Parthian kingdom. He returned. Herod promised him to return, and he'd give him honors and so forth and so on. And the whole story is how Herod betrayed him and then had him executed. And his execution was considered. There was a popular support for Hyrcanus II, and the things that the John the Baptist passage has matched Hyrcanus II, the things that people think about John the Baptist in the Gospels that don't match the Hyrcanus II are not in the John the Baptist passage. And so you start with most basic things. You have a righteous man. You have a righteous man that teaches baptizing. Okay, I just interpret that as that's Jewish purification, which was happening in the first century BCE, with Hyrcanus II was a long-lived, decades-long high priest, and that's when the mikvahs and the purification, what's called household Judaism, was coming about. And Hyrcanus II, as high priest, was right in the center of that. So that's the so-called baptism or washings or purification connection. Then you go to the righteous man. He's a righteous man in terms of popular opinion. Herod executed him. You have a ruler, Herod. It's in power. Herod and Herod. You have a Herod in power, and you have an execution of the righteous man that didn't deserve it. You have Herod crushed in a military defeat as divine punishment. That is, as it's popularly viewed, this theme that when the ruler does something evil, then God punishes by having a weather or military disaster, something of that nature. That happened with Herod the Great. Was in a battle with the Nabateans and defeated, according to at that time. And then you go to the name. Now, the name is an interesting one because everyone's thought that Hyrcanus II has been named John Hyrcanus II, but actually that's not really attested. All you have in terms of known information is Hyrcanus II, and you don't know his Hebrew name. You can just assume it's certain that he did have a Hebrew name, it's just not attested. And an analogy would be Antigonus Mattathias, who was the last Hasmonean king. He had a Hebrew name, but you would never know that in historical records. The only way you know Antigonus had a name, Hebrew name Matthew, was from coins. And the reason you don't know that Hyrcanus II had a Hebrew name from coins is because Hyrcanus II did not mint any coins. That's the only reason. And the reason he didn't mint coins, and that's been the whole coin history has been much discussed, but the reason he didn't mint coins, and I go into this in my paper, the best interpretation of that seems to be, because it sounds surprising on the face of it that he wouldn't mint coins, because he was in power so long. But actually, he wasn't in civil power. He was high priest, but he was not in civil power. And there has been some study that shows he was what you call a Roman-appointed ethnarch. And except for being a few months of being king in Josephus until his brother overthrew him, he really didn't have civil power. And there, he wasn't in a position to mint coins. So that the absence of coins from Hyrcanus II is not surprising after all, even though it's been considered surprising and a puzzle that the coin people have struggled with. It's actually not surprising if it's understood that Hyrcanus II never did have civil power apart from that brief, very brief, maybe months of being king, and then he was never in power.
Before you continue, can you move the mic closer to you again? I have some requests in the comments.
Yeah, I apologize. Okay, I will do that, and you'll have to put up with the fact you'll see my face closer up than I normally would talk to people. But does this help right now?
Yes, continue where you were.
I apologize. So I don't know where I was at.
You were talking about Hyrcanus II and some of the parallels with him and John.
Yeah. Okay. On the name, you go to the name. His grandfather's name was John Hyrcanus I. His name was John. That's well supported from massive quantities of coins. So that's not in any question. Hyrcanus II is missing a name of confirmation, but you've got this phenomenon of paponymy. That is where the firstborn son is named after the grandfather's proper name. And so the expectation would be that his name was John. It just simply isn't confirmed in any historical text or source. But that's what it's been thought to have been. It makes sense that it would be John, the paponymy pattern, which may not be absolutely airtight perfect because there have been a couple of exceptions cited to the paponymy pattern. But it's not disputed. There's a basic pattern for the vast majority of cases where there's this paponymy phenomenon was happening of naming firstborn male sons after the proper name of the grandfather. So that's the basis for Hyrcanus II's name being John. And so you have in the John the Baptist passage, you have the righteous man, he's killed by Herod. There's a military defeat that punishes Herod for doing this terrible thing. He's involved with ritual purification and immersions. And he's got, Herod was afraid of revolt, so he kills him. And there was that was why Herod killed Hyrcanus II. He was wiping out the entire Hyrcanus II family because of this rival. Hyrcanus II's daughter, Alexandra, Josephus says, was seriously attempting to try to overthrow Herod. They were both seeking the favor of Mark Antony to, get rid of Herod and reinstate the Hasmonean dynasty. So, there's all this politics and intrigue in the background is why Herod is wiping out every Hasmonean he can find, and the leading one was Hyrcanus II. So that's sort of the context. And it so that's the argument for the match, and it also ties. It's even more than that. It's the language is used in the language used of John the Baptist is similar to the language used of Hyrcanus II. It's very striking, and I give several examples of that. If you'd like, I could actually read a few of them, but that's
sure.
Okay, I'll look them up right now and read them because it's I found it quite striking. You have Josephus says, fearing that everyone would incline to Aristobulus, that's the grandson of Hyrcanus II, Herod put him to death at Jericho. That's I'm quoting from the Loeb translation of Antiquities of Josephus. Now you turn to another. That's in Antiquities 20. In Antiquities 18, I've got the exact references in my paper, but Herod began to fear that John's powerful ability to persuade people might lead to some sort of revolt. Decided to do away with John, Macaris. These are dots. Then there he was killed. And by the way, I am using John Meyer's translation of Antiquities 18 in these quotes. Here's Antiquities 15. Herod believed it would be safest not to have a man who was far worthier than himself of obtaining the kingship wait to seize his opportunity. He ordered the man, Hyrcanus II, to be strangled. So that's how the death of Hyrcanus II is in Josephus, is he's strangled. Here's an Antiquities about the John the Baptist passage. Herod decided to do away with John by a preemptive strike before he sparked a revolt. Herod considered this a much better course of action than to wait until the situation changed than to regret his delay. The same thing. Here's Antiquities 20. Herod married Aristobulus' sister Mariam, hoping to capture the goodwill of the people for himself, thanks to their recollection of Hyrcanus II. He's got this excellent reputation. Here's Antiquities, the John the Baptist passage. Quote, John was a good man, and when the others, the ordinary Jews, gathered together around John, they seemed likely to do whatever he counseled. The same parallel of this reputation and this popular support for this figure, John. And here's the account of his death of Hyrcanus II in Antiquities. Quote, and as proof that it was without committing any crime that Hyrcanus II came to such an end, they specify his mildness of character and the fact that not even in his youth did he give any sign of boldness or recklessness. The charges were a pretext invented by Herod, who was what was most painful of all, as we have said before, was that in his old age, Hyrcanus II came to an unworthy end. That Antipater and Herod advanced so far was due to his mildness, and what he experienced at their hands in the end was neither just nor an act of piety. Now, obviously, this is written from the standpoint of Hyrcanus II, and Josephus is channeling some source that is anti-Herod and pro-Hyrcanus II. But here's the John the Baptist passage now. Quote, for Herod killed him, although he was a good man, and simply bade the Jews to join in purification, provided that they were practicing justice toward one another and piety toward God. It's different language for the same thing. Josephus' story of the execution of John the Baptist corresponds with the story of Herod's execution of Mariam, that's Hyrcanus II's granddaughter, both featuring a popular belief that divine punishment fell on Herod as a result. You have Josephus in Antiquities 15, quote, there arose a pestilential disease that which destroyed the greater part of the people and also the most honored of Herod's friends, and this caused all to suspect that this misfortune had been brought upon them by God in his anger at what had been lawlessly been done to Miriam, that is Herod's execution of his wife, and then he was so remorseful that he killed her, and he missed her so much after he killed her, so he was heartbroken over it. Anyway, here's the John the Baptist passage, quote, "But the Jews were of the opinion that the army of Herod was destroyed to avenge John, God wishing to inflict harm on Herod." So it's the same theme of, although in this particular parallel was with Miriam, but it's the same theme of you have the Hasmonean figure, or any righteous figure actually, and then Herod's punished because he did a bad thing in killing this righteous figure, or popularly sported figure. And so those are the parallels, and then I go into some comparative parallels of other chronological dislocations in Josephus, in doublets and so forth. And so that's the argument. And the irony, and this was not intended, this was actually an accident, but the irony was, and this is very personal, by the way, my argument on Hyrcanus II as the teacher of righteousness has not taken traction among other Dead Sea Scroll scholars. They really think that Hyrcanus II couldn't have been, they see him as Pharisee-allied and so forth, and I actually have, that would take some work to deconstruct that. I don't think that's a correct, really, I think it's a distorted objection. I don't think that's an accurate objection, but I'm just explaining why, even though the time is right there is a considerable body of Dead Sea Scroll scholars that are in the 1st century BCE for all these sobriquet-bearing figures and the sectarian phenomena and so forth and so on in the Qumran text. Although the larger number of Qumran scholars are in the 2nd century BC, so there's this debate between centuries. But on the irony for me personally was that I came through an accidental process to have John the Baptist end up being the teacher of righteousness of the Qumran text. That is, if you accept the Hyrcanus II being teacher of righteousness, which I'm a bit of an outlier on that, even though I think it's right.
Do you think that this Josephus as John the Baptist is the same individual that the Gospels talk about? Since you mentioned earlier that the Gospels are working from Josephus, which I also believe.
Yeah, that's of course the question of interest. My paper does not go into that, and is very explicit about only making this argument on Josephus's passage and the Hyrcanus II connection. Now, to answer your question, I just a few days ago very carefully listened to your podcast with John MacDonald, and then you, in that podcast, not only John MacDonald but you yourself gave quite an extended discussion, quite interesting, on the datings of some of these figures, and you had if I could paraphrase it, sort of a 30s, 60s, 90s theory. You recognize that?
Yeah, that was about the original Paul and 2 other men that were called Paul. Yes.
Yeah. Well, just to be very brief, I think you're very much on the right track with those last 2. And the only modification I would make, this would of course take a lot of work and in depth to actually argue and discuss it, but I would just drop off that first one, the 30s. You've got a 60s and a 90s. That rings right. And I personally have become convinced that the 30s context that the Gospels have cannot be historically the right context. In other words, this was actually first revolt material, basically, and thereabouts, that has been somehow in the text fictitiously put into a different chronological setting than it actually was. And there's a lot of discussion on that whole issue, but the upshot is that I don't think there was any John figure in the time of Herod Antipas, or the 30s, that there is, and in terms of how that happened in the Gospels, this again is some development that's not been published by me, but this is, I came to see that the John, this is surprising here, but that the John of the Gospel of John, 4th Gospel, And by the John of the Gospel of John, I'm talking about the Gospel of John's own John. That's the one that appears in chapter 1. That's the, implied author of the Gospel of John. If you read the text as a text and the title says this is the Gospel of John, it's not talking Gospel of John of Zebedee. It's talking Gospel of the text John. John of Zebedee isn't in the Gospel of John, except for this added little editorial gloss at the final chapter. Apart from that, he's not in the Gospel of John as a major figure. The overpowering major figure that opens the Gospel, the figure that's the most important figure in the entire Gospel, next to Jesus, is John. That's the text John. That's the text owned John. That's the title of the author and the implied author. And so then I began to think this, because I have this sense that most of the major figures in context are really First Revolt, not 30s. It's First Revolt material written in later text. And that figure, that character John, in the first chapter of the fourth gospel, I do not believe is the same figure as the one in Josephus. That's the Josephus John the Baptist. And I've looked at that very carefully. Now, the reason that question is confusing is because in the Synoptics, you've got lots of parallels between John the Baptist and the Synoptics. John the Baptist does have parallels with the Josephus antiquities. And that I basically attribute to the fact that the Synoptics John the Baptist figure is a mixture of the real John of the fourth gospel in a First Revolt context has been mixed fictitiously or literarily, however you want to interpret it, with material drawn from Josephus on this other John. And the names, they're both named John, but that's a common name. They both are involved with the purification and baptizing, but then Jesus was called a Baptist. The apostles were baptizers. John is not called a Baptist in the fourth gospel. He does baptizing, but he's not called the name the Baptist. And I don't see any strong evidence that the figure in the fourth gospel named John, leave the Synoptics out of this, but just taking the portrayal of the fourth gospel of John, that is, I'm arguing that that's a separation, not the same figure as Josephus John the Baptist, but that the Synoptics have conflated or put under influence of Josephus have made this more of a fictitious character, but that the real character of John was the Johannine John figure, the John that was at the First Revolt, the John that's the figure in Revelation 1:10. This figure's got lots of legends about him, and he's not Josephus John the Baptist. So that's the argument on that.
We have a super chat question from John D. Thank you for your super chat. How do we know that the first name of Hyrcanus II was John? Good
question. The answer to that is it's not known for sure. It's not known. It's not known in the sense of there's no known historical source that directly corroborates or verifies that. That's indirectly surmised and has been traditionally on the basis of eponymy, which is this practice of Jewish naming of babies, firstborn male baby named after the proper name of the grandfather. And the proper name of the grandfather for Hyrcanus II was John. That's John Hyrcanus I. That's verified. But the answer to the question is that's not verified. It's simply extremely plausible, and that's what has traditionally been thought, and there's no evidence against it. That's the basic status of that.
John D, thank you for another super chat. What do you make of Feudas' story and Josephus in relation to John the Baptist?
I don't think I have anything specific to offer on that. Obviously, these stories of these, sign wonders, miracle workers, and the Doudna story is of great interest. And I just don't have anything to offer on that.
Why do you think that Josephus chose to refer to Hyrcanus II as John the Baptist when he doesn't seem to refer to other figures as the Baptist, just him?
That's a good question. It's this phenomenon of giving names and nicknames and so forth is a it's a wide phenomenon. It's been well studied. First of all, I think that Josephus was getting that from a source. This is a source. It's a Jewish source of stories of holy men. It's the best I can surmise that it sounds like, and that some of the other stories of holy men that have been inserted in antiquities possibly come from the same collection of sources. And some of these stories from this source, this hypothesized source, do turn up in the rabbinic literature, although the John the Baptist specific story does not turn up in the rabbinic literature, which I would interpret as accident. But as far as the nickname Baptist, I can just give a conjecture on that. I may not be right, but I can guess it where the name come from. It's just like lots of nicknames and lots of how do any nicknames come about that the Josephus is filled with, biblical texts are filled with. Hyrcanus II was in exile in Parthia. He was deposed by his nephew Antigonus Mattathias, and he was mutilated with his ears and so forth. And but when he went to but the Parthian ruler Phraates honored Hyrcanus II, released him from his bonds. This is what Josephus says. So Hyrcanus II had a house in the city of Babylon, and he was honored as the high priest and king of the Jews of the diaspora. That's what Josephus says. This is a very important figure. Now, he was not serving as high priest in Jerusalem, but he was called high priest. He was considered legitimate high priest. It was like a two-pope situation, except you have a two high priest situation with partisans on each side thinking there's the right high priest. The only difference is that Hyrcanus II doesn't have control of the temple. And this is where I saw the pattern match with the teacher of righteousness image, this righteous figure that's given all this high priestly language, and that's where he gets his status, reputation. A lot of scholars think the high teacher of righteousness used to be a high priest, a literal one. So it all fits Hyrcanus II. And so Hyrcanus II is in Babylon. He's being honored. He's used to household purification. He's used to the mikvahs and everything when he was high priest, all that. Maybe he was practicing that in Babylon. He had a house. Maybe he's purifying himself a lot. He's a famous figure. It'd be easy to imagine they'd call him, well, this is the guy that immerses. He's the immerser. He's the guy that washes himself all the time, with this ritual washing. I'm just guessing. He's called the Baptist for that reason. Baptist is immerser, one that does washing purifications all the time. That's a guess.
We have a super chat question from Awesome Matt Awesome. Can you clarify? Thank you for your super chat. Can you clarify who the John of the fourth gospel is, and the John of Revelation? You mentioned the John of the first revolt. Is this John of Goodacre?
I think so. I do. That obviously it's a controversial question. It requires a lot of argument. It has to be developed. It can't be argued in two sentences, but I think that's fundamentally correct.
What do you think the John the Baptist, the Gospels John the Baptist was originally described as before he got conflated with Josephus's John the Baptist?
Okay. In terms of the real John, of the one that's not Josephus's John the Baptist, the one in the first revolt, there probably you've got the first chapter of the fourth gospel, and then there's a few references later on in the Gospel of John, but that would be a tradition, Christian tradition of Christians that had something to do with, or claimed they had something to do with the work of this John. So that's one source. And then you have lots of traditions about John, the Asia Minor traditions and so forth and so on. And it's interesting, you mentioned let's mention for a moment the figure of the beloved disciple. Now, I actually have a paper published on the beloved disciple. I made the case that the beloved disciple is Andrew. That's actually less informative than it sounds, even if the argument is right, because there is a question of who was Andrew. There's nothing known about him. I mean, his famous brother Simon Peter's got lots of stuff, but Andrew's, you don't even know his name. Andrew, that's a Greek name. You don't even know Andrew's Hebrew name. He probably had one. I mean, he almost certainly would have one if he's Jewish, which he was. So, he's either a fictitious made-up character, or there's not the full story told. You don't know how. You don't even know his Hebrew name. Okay, but never mind that. Everyone's familiar that studied the fourth gospel is familiar with James Charlesworth has written a book with something like 26 historically argued theories of the identity of this character.
I've had him on the show before. Yep.
Okay. And I've had that book. I like the book because it's so informative, and it's got, it gives the background and the bibliography and all that. And what's fascinating is, and think about this for a second, he's got 26 theories, and this is the history of scholarship. And he's got them all listed there, all the ones that have been argued, tells their case, pros and cons, and so forth. What's missing there? What's missing is the main figure in the fourth gospel named John. That's absolutely missing. That's never been proposed to be the beloved disciple. The Gospel of John's John, that is the John that the text is talking about as John, that's never even been on the map as being a candidate for the beloved disciple. Well, now you could come up with reasons why it can't be the beloved disciple because of in prison and death and so forth. Yeah, you can come up with that, but I'm just saying it's an oddity that you have this figure that's so central, the beloved disciple, that's so interesting, and you have traditions that he was John, and nobody's connected it to the text. John, right in the text, right, opens the text. Most important disciple in the entire fourth gospel is John, that tells the world who Jesus was. I mean, John he's the one that tells the world that Jesus is the Christ. So there's something odd there about a whole 2 centuries of scholarship that have come up with 26 different theories with extended arguments on the identity of the beloved disciple, and of nothing in the Charlesworth book refers to a proposal or consideration that this figure, the beloved disciple, was the text leading prominent figure named John. So that's a bit of an irony to me.
So why do you think it's Andrew?
Well, you can read my paper on my website, www.scrollery.com. On the Andrew, that was because he fits the when Andrew drops out, the beloved disciple appears. Andrew is the one that brings Peter to Jesus. The beloved disciple is the intermediary to Jesus. I go into that. Andrew is, you got the story of Jesus calling the disciples in the Sea of Galilee. He calls Peter. In John 21 is a dislocated. I mean, it's a variant version of that call of disciples of Galilee. And there, Andrew's missing. The beloved disciple's there. You got the beloved disciple being a fisherman. That's in John 21. So he's a fisherman. He's with Peter. Andrew's missing. There's the argument there. And on the others, I go into argument for why it's a matchup with Andrew. I also then went into the Meritory Canon, which said that the source of the Gospel of John was initiated by the Apostle Andrew, and then John wrote it down then. That is, John and Andrew are different people. And John was the guy that wrote it, but that it was a vision of Andrew that started the Gospel. So I thought that probably came from Papias, and probably, maybe that was an allusion to the actual apostle that was considered the authority of the fourth gospel. So I went into that further. Anyone can look at my paper on that if they're more interested.
So my final question, if you had to sum it up, what would you say are like the few strongest points that really show that John the Baptist is based on Hyrcanus II?
Well, I just say that it's a to me it's an overwhelming match of the the forms of literary expression, the themes that run through, the specific details, and the plausibility that there can be a story out of a source that's turns up as a doublet, that where the authors don't recognize that this is over here and this source is talking about this same figure over here, or even if they do, maybe they don't care, they just put both stories in. But in this particular case, the fact that the story, a source of a story about a holy man John that baptized and that immersed, was involved with, that is, with purification, and was very reputable, that just matches the ex-high priest Hyrcanus II and being killed by Herod and so forth. And the mechanism of the mistake would be that the readers of the source attached it to the wrong Herod, and that's the argument. It's you don't have any other historical verification that there was a John the Baptist in the 30s. You get that from the Synoptic Gospels, and depending on if you assume that, if you think that that's the same figure in the first chapter of John, then you've got the four Gospels put them there, but you don't have historical verification for that. And so that's the argument. I mean, you can read my paper for the details on that, but that's how it looks to me.
Solar Knight, thank you for your super chat. Josephus states that Herod Antipas executed John. Gospel of Mark attributes the execution to Herodias. Why?
Well, I don't consider the Gospel of Mark to be historically credible on this story. The banquet, the head on the platter, the jealousy and all that. That's to me is in the realm of fiction, and I mean, this is relatively mainstream scholarship on this. That's a lot of fictional elements there. So that is just a product of later literary development of the Synoptic Gospels, the Gospel of Mark. I don't know exactly how that happened, but you could have. But there's a lot of argument that the Gospel of Mark drew upon Josephus. Now, that's not I wouldn't say that's a majority argument, but there is a scholarly argument on that.
All right, so we're going to close. And that being said, Gregory, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during the live stream. Thank you.